Well, Leo, thanks for climbing into the BuzzBubble this morning. I appreciate you coming by. So the consumer is the medium is something that your agency coined. So let's talk about that and the fundamental change in the agency role that really implies.
Yeah, when I guess casting mind back, so you decide to start a company, and at some point you realize you probably need a website, and that you don't, at that stage you obviously haven't got a body of work that you want to, put out there, and so we were thinking about what our site should be, and and we just had a silly idea to have a series of lips, so we had a page of lips that was, for us, it was a visual interpretation of the modern word of mouth, and what happened, what ended up happening is we wrote this agency philosophy, if you like, and it's really the insight that we just come from Saatchi New York, and before that Jan and I were at Saatchi London.
Okay.
And so often we were getting, you get, as is very common, 5-6 years ago, that you get tasked to do something as a creative person, and a lot has already been decided.
Right.
There was already a lot of decisions made, and it's kind of born out of frustration of that a little, that we just you have the opportunity as a new company to start from a blank slate.
Right.
And it had become increasingly evident that the consumers had more power, and to such an extent that they were really blurring the lines between media.
Right.
So in a lot of ways it seemed almost redundant that you would have such a commitment to one medium, given the ability for consumers to change it, and especially you don't necessarily know what the problem is you're trying to solve yet.
Right.
So it was really born out of that, and we articulated it as the consumer is the medium, and and just acknowledgement of that they have the power to kind of enhance ideas, to bring brands down, to bring brands to the top. They were no longer the destination of our work; they'd become the medium for it. So everything we've tried to do since is optimizing against consumers.
Right.
And I remember some of the first work we did, it sounds kind of, it's ironic, but we did this piece that we from the beginning deemed a piece of digital work, but there was nothing digital about it. We had done this, working with a soccer boot brand, as you call it here, and one of the things that we'd realized is that 80% of people who try on the boots buy them, right? And
wow.
So it didn't make sense to come out with a traditional thing to start with, given that the biggest business task was to get people to try these things on. We created this pop-up store called the Right Boot Store, and digital could become the vehicle for which it would this idea would be shared, because people could walk into the store and they could take away a boot for free, but not a pair of boots, just one boot, just the right boot. So the left boot you could use your old boot at home, and compare the two. And if you preferred the one on your right foot, then you paid double the price for the one on your left. And you went to the site and you learned about the brand story. And it was therefore a piece of digital work for us, and it got covered by it ran in Berlin, so it got covered by some Der Spiegel and some decent German publications, and it was an early indication for us of the sort of digital work, our view on digital. We live in a digital era, it's not really a separate medium.
Right.
And it can become a really powerful vehicle to spread ideas that consumers are interested in.
And I've seen you guys take it to experiential so many times. Some of the best work. We'll talk about the Coke Hilltop piece that you did as well. But before we do that,
even the Daffies, the Daffies thing that we did that used Twitter as the hub in a way. Okay. It was the only media we bought was outdoor. We only bought outdoor media, and we let the consumer kind of piece the thing together. So, early on we had a healthy cynicism about getting caught up in, not getting caught up in or seduced by technology for the sake of it, but just doing what we did, but just taking advantage of all the tools that digital had brought to the table.
Excellent. So let's go back to the beginning. You mentioned, when you first started out. What about that migration from Saatchi for the two of you, and how did that idea come about, and the inception of the idea, and then you kind of go, yeah, let's do it.
Well, I think as a creative person, it's always, you just need to be excited and passionate about what you do.
Sure.
It's the only way you're going to continue to be good at it. And
right.
I think that when we joined New York, I think Saatchi New York, a lot of, anyone you talk to say, don't do it.
Right.
Don't do it. There are a lot of other
That's when you know it's a good idea.
And the more we heard it, the more we were excited about taking up the challenge.
Right.
And
creatives don't like to be told no, I think.
Yeah, perhaps it. Yeah, I guess there's always that of, and proving that creativity can change things. But something funny happened there where it was you went into it expecting that the clients would be difficult and not buy good work. And what happened, the more time we spent, seeing the sort of work that was there being presented and getting in front of the clients, something very liberating happened where you realized the clients were very open to great work. Yeah. And it was just about putting it in front of them.
Right.
In a sensible and responsible way.
Right.
And the more we saw that happen, the more we, Jan and I became excited about spending more time, talking to clients, understanding what was on their minds. You suddenly, when you're presenting work, it's not like you're trying to sell it any longer. You're sort of their partner in it, and it was a powerful experience. And then we, after 2.5 years, we kind of, had accomplished what we were excited about what we'd achieved. Really talented people who kind of helped get the agency to Agency of the Year at Cannes, and P&G ultimately won, Market of the Year the following year. And it was just the feeling that the way consumers were engaging with brands was changing.
Right.
And could a big agency change as quickly? And that was what we became excited about. And like I said, when you become excited about something, you kind of have to follow through with it.
Right.
And that's what we did. And we built the company on this idea that the consumer had become the medium. And you go into those things, expecting it's going to be kind of, completely rosy. And of course, there's
well, you fast forward 2.5 years.
A lot that you learn on the way.
Right.
A lot that you learn on the way. And ultimately, all of that stuff makes you stronger and much more able to overcome whatever obstacles you get in the future. But it was you constantly need to be learning. I mean, I was creative director at 25, 26 when I was at Saatchi, and then right. We became ECDs of the department a couple of years after that. And I was learning, about being creative director there.
Right.
And when we started, the company, it was, we were learning about what it was like as a creative person to run a company. So you never have all the answers, but the best way to learn is to learn on the job.
Right. And what do you think about the new agency model that everyone's talking about between client and agency? Is it more collaborative, or does it just require more trust from the client to just say, we trust you, do what you have to do? Which side of that coin do you think we're on?
Well, if you take a step back for a second, and I think that in some ways the role of the CMO it's changed a little bit. I think I think that the tenure of the CMO has become longer.
Yeah.
It used to be quite short, surprisingly short. The average CMO used to stay in their job for 18 months, and it's hard to have an influence in an organisation when that's the length of the stay. And I think what you're seeing is them become more influential. You're seeing them part of the C-suite, and
right.
You're seeing them become very comfortable. I think 5 years ago there was a little bit of trepidation about the impact of digital. Do I have to really deal with it? Right. There's this new channel. There's another thing I have to contend with. And I think that there's becoming a real, comfort now that it is we live in a digital world, and my brand doesn't have to be everywhere for the sake of it.
Right.
And if you couple that with with advertising which gets to in some ways the real power of advertising, when it helps companies articulate what they're about.
Sure.
What they stand for. Advertising, like that can really become these organizing ideas or organizing principles for companies. And to get that, and to have, and for a CMO or for an agency to have that impact on a brand, it's difficult to do it on a project basis.
Right.
I think they need to be longer term engagements, and there's always going to be the notion of projects that come up. But I think that we strive for those longer term engagements, because that's really where you see the difference that somebody can make.
Sure.
Again, to the CMOs becoming more comfortable about the role of digital. I think there's I think what you'll see is not a kind of a going back to the old model, but just a comfort with how to engage with digital media and therefore agencies. And I think what you'll start to see is CMOs craving kind of a one point of contact, or thought leaders who can make sure that ideas and brands are consistent, and that decisions are being made for the interest of the brand's business problem.
And they're looking to a single agency, or you think they're because you talk about project and versus AOR, that's changing so much as well.
Yeah.
Very blurred lines between a project agency and who's your AOR? Well, we have three.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? I know you guys are heralded for a lot of your projects that are just stand out and fantastic, but I know you have those stronger relationships with the brand than a one-off for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's difficult to be. I mean, we don't kid ourselves for a second that we're not experts in producing and hiring or investing in the production side of bringing a lot of the digital aspects to life. And we've always looked at it a bit like agencies would look at TV. You come up with that powerful idea, but you look around the agencies. The director isn't sitting in the agency to hand off and go and make the thing. And if we're honest with ourselves, then if you want to be the best in class at a certain thing, then you kind of need to commit to that one thing, and continue to evolve the company in that way. So that's why I think that partnering with it always makes our ideas better.
Right.
If we can partner with someone who's absolutely fantastic at that thing, and it's in service of the brand, then rather than competing interests. And I think our best work, if we look back at the kind of the work that we've done, our best work is when that's happened.
So let's talk about the work. You guys did fantastic at the new Cannes Mobile Lions, and one of the things that was on the top of the list was the Coke Hilltop tribute, which I think was brilliant work. And looking back at something that was 40 years, and just an iconic TV spot that you guys took literally and rolled out in this experiential/digital campaign. Talk about how that came about, and I feel like that would have come up in the creative room and somebody said, that's a great idea, we'll never be able to roll it out. Was it daunting to think, this is terrific, but how do we get this done?
Yeah, the question, I mean, it's funny that, because it's so often a question is that possible?
Is it doable?
Is it possible? And then it's like, well, let's go and look into it. But no, the great thing about that is, from a technical perspective, we had Grow involved, throughout that process. And so the question of is it possible was kind of solved in the room. We had the concepts being come up with, but then the technical aspects of can we make this happen, and does it make sense, were kind of solved there.
Right on the spot.
Right on the spot. So we kind of knew from the beginning that it was. In terms of like the whole, the assignment in general was, I remember getting it was essentially business to business brief, because obviously the Hilltop thing was one component of the idea, and you can imagine getting what is in essence like can we convince industry that that we can change this way out advertising. I remember reading it, going through it and thinking, right, it's going to be how are we going to do that, and can we do great work, and not sure whether we're going to kind of get involved in it. But the more we read it, the more we went, well, we've been convinced.
Sure.
Jan and I were both convinced that there's stuff here about the potential of display advertising that we didn't know before. So then it became, without getting the entire industry to read an RFP, 20-page document, can we get them? Can we change the perception of it? And that's really where the thought came from. Is rather than kind of talking more about it, industry had to some extent become immune to the talk of possibilities. Is that we just looked at things like Whopper sacrifice. That example just inspired people to get excited about Facebook advertising. And BMW Films all that time ago, the same with had the same impact on inspiring people to create brand content.
Right.
And that was kind of the birth of it. Is can we create these powerful examples for brands and actually walk the walk and put this idea of potential actually to the test. And there's no bigger test in a way than taking the most iconic pieces of advertising from the past, and that was the tension that I think made the ideas special.
That's fantastic. So let's talk about the power of story. Much of your work is visually simple, yet tells an amazing story. Talk about the creative approach, and as an aside, the voice selection process. Is that arduous, and how do you go through that? Because it's such an important piece of things like the Sprite bottle campaign, and I mean, again, visually simple, just a great idea and executed so well.
Yeah. The voice. We always go through the voiceover process and say to ourselves, well, okay, so after that painful process, now we've figured it out, and then you go through it, and then you embark on another search for a voice, and you encounter a whole bunch of different problems. I don't think there's ever a right or wrong. I think that in the production process, ideas become special or not, and you have to kind of you have to be at the mercy of whatever the idea is, and just try and be true to it. And it means the process is always going to be unique. On one of the Dan Boots film that we did, which is kind of the first piece of work we did, we had a piece of music on it, and we just the client and us were just going, can this be better? And ended up working with the composer, who were then at Amber Music, now Falling Your Sword, who actually put his own voice to it as just part of the seeing how it would go with the music, and it was just fantastic, and he ad-libbed throughout the thing, and it made it special because it mirrored what was happening visually. Visually, there was this kind of visual, like vomit, if you like, and he just came out. And it was kind of a never-ending sentence, if you like. But the passion was there in his voice, and it just felt so authentic because a lot of it was spontaneous. And that was it was used that scratch original vocal as the final. Yeah, there were a few adjustments on the way, but pretty much. And you've coined another phrase, visual vomit. That's great. And one of the things that I think you've got to that we try to remind ourselves of is work with actors. Yeah. There's a difference between actors and voiceover artists. Right. And the performance is so important. It's not just about the texture of the voice. Right. And that's something that we we try and carry on as we go, because like you say, it's so crucial. Yeah. It just makes how you feel about the spot. Yeah. So working with actors, it's and again, simple. You guys do such simple work that's great. At least I always think the best ideas are really simple in their essence, and people always go, boy, I should have thought of that. That's great. Was the Talking Stain for Tide, was that one of your first forays into Super Bowl as a solo? It was, yeah. It was the first Super Bowl spot we'd done. And again, simple, perfect. Yeah, it started out as a regional launch. Oh, really? So when we created the... So you didn't go to create it as a Super Bowl spot? No. And... now the client recognizes...
capacity to be great and have such effect?
Yeah, they started to see the kind of the momentum it was building and stuff. And maybe that's what made it effective on the Super Bowl. The fact that it was just 2 cameras and it wasn't a piece of work that was playing to the event, you know, and it stood out for that reason. But you know, that piece of work in particular is I think creative directors sometimes take a lot of credit for the work, and I think that our job on that was to spot it, you know, to sell it, and then to guide it through the production process. And I think, you know, the team on that did a fantastic job, Dan Lucy and Nathan Frank, coming up with, you know, just a very simple, you know, expressing a very simple insight.
Right.
I remember when the brief came in, we were kind of pushing back on moving it away from, you know, something that just felt functional, you know, the launch of a product, and towards something that just felt like it had played a more of an emotional role. I mean, stains can be undermining, you know. And it just, the fact that it was a mobile
Was that the essence of the brief?
Because
that came through with the commercial.
The fact that it was a mobile product just broadened the canvas and meant you could just, you know, you could play pretty much with any scenario.
Great spot. So let's talk about the role of video today, you know, from TV spot to tablet to in your hand to pre-roll, you know, not broadcast, regional or digital, it's kind of one-to-one buys. You know, what are your thoughts on where video is going from the spot format to shorter formats for pre-roll, longer formats for branded content? You know, video is such a powerful medium right now, and it is engaging people. People are paying attention if it's good.
Yeah, I think I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? As an industry, we've spent so much money, and a lot of what you do, the first thing that you try and do with a TV spot is get someone's attention or get inside someone's mind with a spot. So so much energy goes into standing out, you know. And I think far too often how that manifests itself is that, you know, our commercials shout at people, you know, try and steal attention away from, you know, the commercial before or after.
Right.
And I think as an industry, the notion of restraint is an important one for us. You know, that we don't have to force ourselves to a new medium for the sake of it. You know, that we can actually go where it's appropriate for this idea. And I think it's interesting times in terms of the film, because I think what you start to see happening is that film will start to be seen in by a much more relevant audience. You know, so potentially an audience who's much more predisposed to being engaged to that film.
Right.
And I'm hoping that it's like there's a confidence to that you'll see in the work, that it doesn't need to shout, it doesn't need to, you know, spend the first 20, 30 seconds, you know, trying to grab your attention, but it can actually start off with the confidence that it's actually starting, you know, from inside your head, you know, because it is a page. It's been delivered on, you know, before a piece of content that I'm really interested in, or on a page that I'm, you know, acknowledging the page that it's on. So that's one of the interesting things that I think we'll start to see happening with film. And then as agencies, how do we create a way of working that allows us to turn out more content? You know, because as audience is becoming more niche and more narrow, then how are we balancing the production investment versus, you know, the smaller audience? And I think that's an interesting, you know, challenge for us, because we need to figure out ways to be producing more stuff for smaller audiences. So,
which does impact the budgets, and you've got serial, you know, content that needs to come out more often at lower budgets, and that is a challenge.
Yeah. Exactly.
Let's talk more about story. You know, people throw it around too much. What does it really mean? You know, we all try and create a narrative and story that's worth hearing, but
there's a kind of a few aspects of it, isn't there? The one is the story of the execution. You know, what's the story in the commercial? What's the narrative of the commercial?
Right.
It's interesting. I took a look at Superman, the new Superman, and it's interesting that this film from, you know, decades ago had the impact that it did, you know, and there must have been stuff that was working, that was powerful about it. And you know, you look at the new one, and it's so much about you know, the explosions and, you know, living up to the production of it. And they almost missed some really important story cues.
Right.
You know, the idea that, you know, I'm talking about it, a big Hollywood film now, but you know, the notion that like when the bad guys figured out that Superman actually cared about humans, that was an important story moment.
Right.
You know, there's an important moment in the story where they realized discovered his vulnerability that was kind of skipped over.
Really?
For this
chasing
massive production,
chasing
and
explosions,
and planets blowing up, which kind of makes it more of just, you know, a lot of other films.
Yeah, I mean, everything's produced as if we have to believe that was actually happening when we look at it on the screen. And story becomes secondary too often.
And then there's the story of the brand, you know, that I think consumers are more and more interested in.
Right.
You know, as an agency, I think our role is to actually consider it, and not the immediate inclination be to impose ourselves or our own kind of agency brand onto that brand, because, you know, some of these, you know, brands have been around for 100 years. They're obviously doing something right.
Right.
And, you know, our role is to, you know, the moment that we touch them, we make sure that they're continuing to be on course, and that we improve that brand story for that moment in time that we came across it.
Right.
And I think the brand story is a really, really important piece. You know, in many ways, like one of my favorite, you know, spots, you know, of all time is that Apple Think Different commercial.
Yeah.
And, you know, TBWA and you know, and Steve Jobs, they put the story of the brand back on course with that idea. It was almost, I'd argue, as important, you know, a product that he ever made, that 60-second spot.
Yeah.
Because if you think about the moment in time that it happened, you know, he'd just come back to the company, and the products that they were making were, you know, a little all over the place.
Right.
And he kind of said to everyone who worked there, this is who we are.
Yeah.
This is the company we are. And if you make products here, these are the sort of products, you know, you should be making. And at the same time, he sort of thanked everyone who'd stuck with him for the decade that they'd been doing, you know, not what they had before. So I just think that's advertising at its best. Advertising at its best is when it helps create a North Star for companies. And sometimes through the process of creating advertising, you articulate that. But that's a real contribution, you know, us as agencies can make.
I agree.
Help brands articulate.
I mean, yeah, you know, the direction, the vision, and their business plan for the next step and the next generation. I mean, that is such a great spot. And it said it was okay. It's like we've got 4% of the market, but be part of this group, you know, and the people that he rattled off in that commercial were just the greatest minds, and they certainly weren't the norm. They didn't want the 95%.
Yeah, and I think at the time, you know, won a gold lion at Cannes or something, and you know, in hindsight, you just go that piece of work was deserving of every industry accolade because of the difference it made. The story of the brand, I think, is absolutely crucial, and I think that while we don't necessarily go out to, you know, to express it or to solve it as the immediate challenge, it's often the great pieces of work. It's there lying somewhere. It's lying in the work somewhere.
Right.
And you know, that spot in particular, you just go, if there was a Grand Prix for the last, you know, 20 years, then that should be it.
Takes it.
Because the difference it made.
It's funny you say that. So George Lois says that, you know, the ideas are just floating around. You just have to realize that, you know, recognize them and pull them out of the air. So let's talk a little bit about you. Let's learn a little bit more about Leo. So what was your first break in the ad biz, and do you remember your first ad?
Yeah, I think the first break was probably getting fired.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Sometimes that's...
Yeah, I think it was an important you know, moment, because I was as an agency that didn't, you know, didn't understand the type of work I was interested in. And I think as a young creative, it's, you know, it's very easy, and I think any good creative kind of does this, to look inward and start to doubt yourself. And I think that was a really important moment for me, because I suddenly, you know, started, moved on to you know, other places where I found, you know, like-mindedness, and you know, you started to fight the real battles, which was getting clients on board with your ideas and getting them out into the world in a proper way, and not so much the internal thing. You know, I think for young creatives, it's really important not to kind of underestimate what you're excited about, you know, and what you want to do. And you know, lucky at that point that when that happened, that I kind of, you know, I stuck to my guns, and I was really passionate about the sort of work I wanted to make, and I continued on that course. You know.
Excellent. So how about, that's the what, how about the who? Who's been instrumental in your career or life, you know, and how? You don't have to thank Mom.
Yeah, I will actually. When you're from an Italian family, you know, growing up in Australia, it's, you know, you kind of, you know, you get in trouble if you don't mention your grandfather.
Right. Smack him back of the head.
No, he was a real inspiration to me. I would put my parents in probably the most instrumental, because I had a dad that just, growing up in Australia, you just drive a lot. You know, you're in a car, it's a big country, and he just seemed to have like Cat Stevens on repeat in the old cassette. And I just grew up with a fascination of language and words. Eventually went to university, kind of majoring in journalism, and then, you know, a mother who was just very, you know, very much about, you know, if you want something, then you know, kind of go and do it. And that, I think that combination is really important. Jan will always, you know, when there's, you know, kind of, you know, decisions to make, he'll talk about this, you know, the flicking of a coin. It's like you choose, you know, heads this happens, and you know, tails this thing happens. But it's not really whether it's heads or tails. It's like, well, the coin's still covered up. What do you wish it was?
Right.
You know, and it's like being
able
able
to look at it.
Yeah, being able to, you know, follow your gut is really important. But it takes, I think, a certain amount of naivety and a certain amount of ability. And there's so much talk in our industry, but ultimately it's the work that kind of leads the way and makes a difference. And you see people do things that haven't been done before. Right. And they're the ones that have paved the way for the rest of us to, you know, follow.
Get great work accepted. So if you weren't doing this, advertising, any idea what you would be doing?
I tried that. I resigned when I was in my early 20s. I resigned from my job, and I was a goalkeeper.
Okay.
And I was trying to juggle both things, and I thought, I'm just going to go and give this a go.
You thought breaking through in advertising was tough.
And it was funny because I took
sports.
Yeah, it was funny because I took 3 months off, and what happened is that I couldn't stop thinking about
right.
And I realized that actually in the process that it was really my, you know, what I love to do. And even if I, you know, could have made it, which I probably wouldn't, I had a burst appendix that, you know, kind of kept me away. That actually happened the day before I was flying, and
that'll keep you out of the goal.
It kept me out. I was going to Germany for trials at the time. My younger brother had, you know, kind of let me his freaking flyer points. I don't know how he mustered up more points than I did. But it was an important experience, because for 3 months I did nothing else but that, and coming out of it, you know, waking up from the anaesthetic, actually, I had an advertising idea. Like, I woke up literally with an advertising idea, and I thought, well, you know, I should probably listen to that, and you know, that's what I decided to pursue.
You ever had a dry spell and gone back to that anesthesia and said?
At some point. No.
We don't condone that. No. So how about other personal passions? Top 2 or 3 personal passions.
I don't know, you mentioned story. I think it's, you know, it's in whatever form, you know, film and, you know, books and songs and stuff. There's Walter Lippmann has that quote, you know, the world is the way that we imagine it at any point in time. And, you know, story does get us to act a certain way as people, and it has a profound impact on us. So, I mean, the idea, stories are, you know, something is something that's, you know, very close to my heart. And then my 2 boys. You know,
how old are
they? 5 and 3 months.
Okay. So busy guy. Yeah, they bring you lots of joy. I have 3 kids. Yeah, the joy that you can't imagine. All right, so this brings us to the buzz round. rapid fire questions, basics of life, you know, things you like or don't like. So if you're ready, I'm just gonna blurt out some questions, you'll blurt out some answers. Start with an easy one, chocolate or vanilla?
Chocolate.
Flip-flops or loafers?
Flip-flops.
Yeah, we got it. What's the most overused word in the ad game?
I've probably used it in this interview. One of the above.
Okay, steak or tofu?
Steak.
Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Yeah.
We've got a cat at the moment in the house.
How's that going?
Well, it's cute because it's small, but dog.
Favorite curse word?
Beep. You'd have to, whatever I say, you'd beep it out.
No. I like some of the, do you have any that are the Australian?
Crikey.
Yeah. Australian vernacular, yes. So what does it say on your favorite t-shirt?
What's a t-shirt? Not on the guest list. Not on the guest list.
Okay, I like that. Are you a night owl or a morning bird?
Morning guy.
Yeah?
Guy, yeah.
Wow, how early do you? I'm
Well,
trying.
not that I get, not,
I'm not
not
doing
that I,
well.
Not that I'm an early riser, but if I would be, if I did, I would be more productive then than later.
Okay. An aardvark in a Hawaiian shirt walks through the door, towel over one arm and a bottle of Sprite on a silver tray.
What's an aardvark?
Aardvark, it's an anteater, weird-looking animal.
Long snout.
Yeah. And what does he say?
He's carrying a Sprite. He's got a.
Yeah, he's got a towel over one arm and he's carrying a Sprite on a silver platter.
Yeah, I think something like I need a new script or something. I don't know what you do with that opening.
Okay, and the last item is, so if you had a theme song, what would it be?
I like the Australian national anthem.
Okay, I was going to say, if you weren't going to get there, I was going to say, what makes you stand up and dance? Well, that would make you at least stand up.
Well, the things that make me stand up and dance is like it's far too embarrassing to come up.
Okay, we'll do some outtakes for those. Well, Leo, thanks so much.
All right.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks for coming down. That's it for BuzzBubble. We'll see you tomorrow.